As for the war, it may see further escalation. Ukraine is finally getting fighter jets and Russia is getting Chinese weapons. Türkiye is reeling under floods after the earthquakes. And the UK has been downgraded on a Civic Freedom Index. It has been described as increasingly authoritarian. It's a story you don't want to miss. The headlines first. Violent protests in France, roads blocked, refineries closed as President Emmanuel Macron overrides Parliament to pass the contentious pension reform. The bill raises retirement age from 62 to 64. It was passed without a vote. Temporary relief for Imran Khan. The Islamabad High Court directs the police to not arrest the former Pakistani Prime Minister, at least till tomorrow. He's been given a chance to appear before the trial court, hearing the Tosha Khana gifts case. Iran's ambassador to India slams the US. Iraj Ilahi says America is not serious about bridging the divide with Tehran. He also accuses the US of using the protests in Iran to derail the nuclear deal. Brazil's president Lula da Silva will visit China at the end of this month, his first since taking office in January. China is Brazil's top trading partner. Lula wants cordial ties in stark contrast with his predecessor, Bolsonaro. Bad news for travellers to the United Kingdom. More than 1,000 passport office workers will go on strike for 5 weeks from next month due to pay disputes. Britain's summer travel season likely to be badly hit. And on World Sleep Day, a Bengaluru-based company announces an optional holiday for its employees to mark the day. But we have lots of news packed for you in the next 50 minutes, which will keep you wide awake. In the last 100 years, the world has seen 4 major economic events. The Great Depression of 1929, the Black Monday crash of 1987, the dot-com crash of 2000, and the financial crisis of 2008. 4 events that shook the global economy. Do you know what's common among them? 2 things. They all started in America, and they all had serious global implications. Now, the year is 2023, and history may be repeating itself. 2 American banks have collapsed. Global banking stocks have nosedived, and the crisis is spreading, and it's all linked to the United States of America. Yesterday, we told you about a 3rd American bank on the brink. Today, it has been rescued. We're talking about the First Republic Bank. Credit ratings agencies had rated this bank as junk, but now it's got a lifeline. America's biggest bank swung into action. 11 banks injected $30 billion, 30 billion. So First Republic has got a cash booster of $30 billion. Why did 11 banks rush to save it? Essentially to save themselves. You see, this was done to contain the panic, to prevent another bank from collapsing. That would have really battered investment sentiment. So First Republic had to be rescued, and it has been. But this is not a sustainable strategy. And the crisis is far from over. Global markets are still in turmoil, and Europe is blaming America for all of this. Regulators in the European Union are calling American officials incompetent. That's the word they used, incompetent. Let me show you a report. It has quotes from senior Eurozone officials. This includes former regulators and policy experts. And they're all angry about one thing: the way the mess at the Silicon Valley Bank was handled. Remember, this crisis began at Silicon Valley. Now, European regulators say the US response was a disaster. I have more quotes. And these are the terms that they've used: total and utter incompetence, very questionable, a disaster. And the last quote is scathing. From a financial stability perspective, they really killed a fly with a sledgehammer. They killed a fly with a sledgehammer, say the Europeans. What are the Europeans so angry about? The Silicon Valley Bank and how the US decided to cover all deposits. EU regulators believe this decision undermines the global regime. As of now, this criticism has not been conveyed officially, but the indictment is strong. Europe says America flouted norms and that American authorities tore up the global rule book. But it shouldn't be surprising, because this is not a first. The US does it all the time. It likes to dictate and set the rules and break them when they do not suit its purpose. But that's a conversation for another time. Coming back to the issue at hand, investors are still afraid. They don't know when this crisis will bottom out. The situation is unpredictable, and some experts say the US government's response is not helping.
The only part here that really makes me worried is that we know that every time the federal government gets involved with the economy, we've seen it in the housing market, we've seen it in bank bailouts, it completely blows any possible perception or risk analysis of what is or is not risky behavior completely out of the water.
And that's a genuine question. How far is the US government willing to go? Will it save every failing bank? How many more banks are in trouble? We don't have the exact number, but multiple banks could be short on cash. Last week, they borrowed about $300 billion. The US Federal Reserve gave out this money. This is America's central bank, the US Federal Reserve. And who borrowed these $300 billion? Nearly half of the amount went to two banks, Silicon Valley Bank and the Signature Bank. These are the two banks that failed last week. Now they've got $143 billion from the Federal Reserve. The money has gone into the holding companies of these banks, $143 billion. What about the rest? Which other banks have borrowed from the US Fed? We don't know yet. The US Fed did not identify the banks. Neither did it share a number, perhaps because it did not want to feed into the panic. You know, once you declare that such and such bank is in trouble and has been given a cash infusion, it sets off a chain reaction. Meanwhile, the government is trying to manage the narrative. Team Biden is sticking to its message. It insists that American banks remain strong. Yesterday, the US Treasury Secretary said the same to the lawmakers.
I can reassure the members of the committee that our banking system is sound and that Americans can feel confident that their deposits will be there when they need them. This week's actions demonstrate our resolute commitment to ensure that our financial system remains strong and that depositors' savings remain safe.
But are these assurances good enough? Just today, another American bank was pulled from the brink. So Washington's problem is not the money, it is the crisis of confidence. And it is hurting businesses across the world. And when we are talking about a crisis of confidence, how can we not bring up China? Its debt piles are unsustainable. We're talking about trillions of dollars in debt, an economy under pressure, and erratic policies. Now, Beijing has shot itself in the foot again. It has disrupted a $21 trillion market, the Chinese bond market. There was panic among investors because China stopped sharing data on bonds. First of all, what is a bond? It is a way for companies and governments to raise money. Basically, bonds are loans. And China suddenly stopped sharing live data about the value of its bonds. This led to panic. Let me explain further. Imagine you're a trader. You buy and sell financial assets for a living, and for this, you rely on data. Now, you turn up for work one day, you switch on your computer, and suddenly your screen goes blank. There is no data. You're unable to see the price of an asset. And if you cannot check the price, how will you buy or sell an asset? I'm not describing a hypothetical situation here. This is exactly what happened to Chinese traders this week. They were unable to check the prices of bonds. When they turned up for work, they were greeted with blank screens. In desperation, many of them came up with hacks. They turned to online chat rooms and to apps like WeChat to share prices and to do deals. But why did this happen? Was there an outage, or did someone order a suspension? Beijing has not offered an explanation yet, but reports say the orders came from Chinese regulators. You see, this data on bond prices is provided by pricing aggregators. Apparently, some of them were asked to stop offering data feeds. Now, we're not sure if it was a blanket ban, but going by one claim, 3 out of 6 aggregators were asked to stop providing data. After the chaos, the data feeds were back online, but the entire episode proved to be an act of self-sabotage. The market was disrupted. And why would China do something like this? After all, debt is their favorite tool. One explanation is this, that Beijing wants greater control over the market. It is making sweeping changes in its financial and tech space. It is replacing its banking regulator. China is creating a new agency to oversee the financial sector. It is also tightening regulation over all kinds of data. And what's driving these decisions? Here is how Beijing explains it. The new administration will strengthen institutional supervision, supervision of behaviors, and supervision of functions. They use the word supervision thrice in one sentence. And supervision in this case means control. These changes are being driven from the top. Xi Jinping has reshuffled his top team. It will give him more control over the state, and more control can also mean more cover-up. China is facing a serious debt crisis. Local governments have amassed a massive pile of debt. They owe more than $9 trillion. And thanks to the interest, this debt pile is growing. Local governments are not being able to pay these loans. So they're putting more pressure on banks. They want loan extensions. They want interest rates to be slashed. Loans of around $790 billion are due this year alone. $790 billion. No local government has defaulted yet. Some have had their loans extended. Others would want the same if they can't come up with the money. But how did they amass so much debt in the first place? This is linked to China's infrastructure push. When there was a boom, the local governments borrowed a lot of money. But right now, the Chinese economy is struggling, and these governments are under strain. China is trying to revive the economy, but even the new premier admits it won't be easy.
China's economic growth target is set at about 5%, which is established after taking into account all factors. Of course, now we have a large economic volume that has passed 120 trillion, and now there are many new challenges. In this high base, to reach the growth target of about 5% is not an easy task. We need to work harder.
Xi Jinping's new powers will come in handy now. But what about the investors? They want stability. They want less knee-jerk reactions from Beijing. For now, that's not happening. So American banks are in trouble. China's system is shaky. Markets are in turmoil. How is the rest of the world faring? Argentina is struggling, with inflation touching 100%. In Lebanon, the currency has plunged to 100,000 against the US dollar. In the UK, the government will be spending more than $100 billion to mitigate the cost of living crisis. And New Zealand is on the brink of recession, with its economy shrinking further. Here's a report.
It's a difficult time to be living in. A host of nations are going through their worst economic crises. Food and essential goods have become expensive. Inflation is soaring. The pandemic still haunts the world's supply chains. And the war in Ukraine is making it worse. It's taking a heavy toll on the world's economy. But some countries are suffering more than others. Let's start with Argentina, where inflation has surpassed the 100% mark. You heard that right, 100%. Argentina is said to be on the brink of recession. It's scheduled to have a presidential election this year. Consumer prices went up by 102.5% in February compared to last year. This is the highest spike after 1991. The prices of consumer goods have more than doubled since last year. And multiple factors have contributed to this rise. Adverse weather conditions, a prolonged heat wave, and a severe drought, to name a few. In Lebanon, the currency is sinking. It's a challenge to barely survive in this West Asian country. It's been torn by years of war, political strife, and a failing economy. The Lebanese pound, also called the lira, has sunk to a historic low. The currency is officially pegged at 15,000 to the dollar. But on March 14th, it was trading at 100,000 to the dollar in the black market. Lebanon's financial system is described as a national Ponzi scheme. The country borrows money to pay existing creditors, much like Pakistan. So its parallel financial system, the black market, is taken more seriously. 75% of Lebanon's population lives in poverty, many of them without basic amenities like electricity and water. The soaring inflation is making matters worse.
Where can we go? Where can we go? They should come take us now. They should just kill us and throw us in the ocean because we can't handle it anymore.
Ramadan is coming now, and we will be forced, in what they call the month of good and blessings, to beg. Today, a piece of lettuce costs 50,000 pounds, and I am retired, and my pension is in Lebanese lira, and I can't even pay my rent. What's my solution?
Reports say people in Lebanon are now resorting to extreme measures, some even taking their lives. In the United Kingdom, even the fittest are struggling to survive. The cost of living crisis has gone on for months. Now the government has announced a budget to mitigate it. London will spend about $114 billion as part of the government's cost of living budget. The UK's economy is struggling, and so are its people. They'll continue to get subsidies on energy consumption. The government will also cut taxes for businesses. Corporation tax will be cut by £9 billion annually for the next 3 years. But these measures are the short-term fix. At some point, the government will have to pull back. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, a recession is much closer than many had anticipated. The economy has shrunk by 0.6% in the last quarter of 2022. And when the economy shrinks for 2 successive quarters, a country is officially in recession. Quite a few sectors have taken a beating. 9 out of 16 industries in New Zealand saw a decrease in activity. Manufacturing was down 1.9%. So was retail trade and accommodation. Arts, recreation and other services took a 4.2% hit. Transport, postal and warehousing went down by 3%. These are just 4 examples, but they show the big picture. Countries are suffering and economies are under pressure.
Meanwhile, the fighter jet politics has taken an interesting turn. Ukraine is finally getting fighter jets. It's been asking for them for a long time. The West refused, but now Poland and Slovakia have stepped up. They've been the most vociferous allies of Ukraine. And now they've set a precedent. Will other Western partners follow suit? Also, how will Russia respond? Because this is one of Putin's red lines, and it is being crossed. In the next few minutes, we'll discuss first the decision from Poland and Slovakia. They've sent 2 messages. To Russia, they're saying, we're not afraid of you. And to their Western allies, they're saying, we'll go it alone. Poland says it will give Ukraine over a dozen MiG-29 fighter jets. 4 of these will be delivered in the next few days. That should serve Ukraine's immediate needs. The remaining jets are being serviced and checked by Poland. They'll be dispatched after all operational and safety checks are completed. And these checks are necessary because Poland is not giving Ukraine brand new fighter jets, or even those which make up a crucial component of Poland's own air force. Poland is giving old jets. Some were waiting to be dispatched to the scrapyard. Now they're being diverted to Ukraine. Listen to what Poland's president had to say.
These are the last years of their being in service according to the technical possibilities, but they are in most cases still in good working condition. First, literally within the coming days, we are handing 4 planes, if I remember well, to Ukraine, in full working condition. The other planes are being serviced, prepared now, and will most surely be handed over gradually.
That was Andrzej Duda. He said the jets being provided to Ukraine are in the final years of service, which is a polite way of saying they're old and of no use to us. Meanwhile, Slovakia has decided to send all its MiGs to Ukraine. It has 13 MiG-29 jets. It will give all of them to Ukraine. So if you look at the total, between Poland and Slovakia, Ukraine will have a squadron of jets. A squadron has anywhere between 8 to 24 aircraft. In the meantime, Poland will get some new jets for itself. It's buying the F-A-50 planes from South Korea and the F-35s from the US. It is letting go of the MiG-29 jets. Poland got this stock from East Germany. This was after the collapse of the Soviet Union back in 1991. This twin-engine jet was designed in the 1970s. It entered service with the Soviet Air Force in 1983 and has been around ever since. It was originally conceived as a combat-only aircraft, but eventually it became a multi-role aircraft. It is capable of air-to-air combat, providing air support, carrying out reconnaissance operations, and boosting Ukraine's overall air defense. So Ukraine will try to get these jets to perform whatever roles they can. And operating them won't pose a challenge for its pilots because Ukraine, too, had a fleet of MiG-29s. This was before Russia invaded it. Now Ukraine does not have a robust air force that can protect its skies, which is why President Zelensky wants his allies to provide jets. But major Western nations and NATO members like the US, UK, Germany and France have refused to give jets. That's because they fear a Russian response. Remember, the Kremlin has been quite clear on this. Providing fighter jets to Ukraine, or for that matter, any weapon system that has long-range capabilities, will lead to an escalation. That's the red line that Vladimir Putin has drawn for the West. And so far, America and allies have been careful to not cross it. But now Poland and Slovakia have. We're waiting to see Russia's response. And here's something that may force the West to take radical steps. Russia is getting Chinese weapons. Let me say this again. China is arming Russia in this war. Chinese weapons have been found in Ukraine. Not the most lethal ones yet, but weapons nonetheless. China has sent 1,000 assault rifles and other equipment like drone parts and body armor. Russia is said to have received 12 shipments of drone parts and over 12 tons of Chinese body armor. These supplies fall in the dual-use category, meaning they're available for anybody to buy. They serve a dual purpose, civilian and military. In this case, they do have clear military applications. And when did China send these shipments? Last year, between June and December, multiple Chinese companies are involved in this, but there's one name that stands out. China North Industries Group Corporation Limited. It is one of the largest defense contractors in China, and it is owned by the Chinese state. On the Russian side, a company called Techkrim is said to be involved. It received these shipments. And how did they reach Russia? They were routed through two other countries, Türkiye and the UAE. The West has been raising alarms about this for weeks now. It has warned China against supporting Russia.
We've been concerned from day one about that possibility. And to date, we have seen Chinese companies, and of course in China there's really no distinction between private companies and the state. We have seen them provide non-lethal support to Russia for use in Ukraine.
How will the West respond to this? So far, the US has stuck to just warnings that China has simply ignored. Instead, China has blamed the West for this war.
It seems that there is an invisible hand pushing for the protraction and escalation of the conflict. Asia, our Asia-Pacific region, should become an arena for win-win cooperation and not a chessboard for geopolitics. No Cold War should be allowed to be repeated in Asia. The Ukraine crisis should not be repeated in Asia.
The Ukraine crisis should not be repeated in Asia. China has dropped a hint there. It is a hint towards Taiwan and Chinese claims on the island. It should tell you how China views the conflict in Ukraine through the prism of Taiwan. Beijing has some clear takeaways from Russia's war, like the Western unity on Ukraine, the relentless supply of weapons, the sanctions, and the disruption of global supply chains. If China attacks Taiwan, it could be at the receiving end of all of this. So China has been watching closely and shaping its strategy vis-a-vis Ukraine, and the strategy has shifted, or you could say it has evolved. When the war began, Beijing supported Moscow, but only quietly. Perhaps it was hoping for a swift offensive and for Kiev to fall within days. That did not happen. China slammed the Western response. It called it a product of Cold War mentality. It also rejected the sanctions against Russia. But now it may be ready to shift, to support Russia more openly and with weapons. We'll get more clues next week. Xi Jinping will be in Moscow. He's confirmed his visit. He will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, and this is what he's expected to discuss.
During his state visit to Russia, President Xi Jinping will have an in-depth exchange of views with President Putin on bilateral relations and major international and regional issues of common concern.
It will be a trip for friendship and peace. That is the message from Beijing. What about the Kremlin? It says the leaders will discuss a quote-unquote comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation. Xi Jinping also plans to talk with Zelensky. Reports say he could meet Ukraine's president virtually, and this will be their first conversation since the war began. What will he tell Zelensky? Does he want a peaceful settlement or a bigger role in the conflict? The world is watching China's next move. Vantage continues after a short break.
Corruption case, of course, in which the arrest was suspended by the Islamabad High Court today. There's another case in which he's been accused of threatening a judge at a public gathering. The non-bailable warrant, NBW, which was issued against Imran Khan, that has been suspended till the 20th of March. Another case. Last year, the Election Commission of Pakistan initiated contempt proceedings against Imran Khan and other PTI leaders for using objectionable language against the CEC. But the Lahore High Court suspended the bailable warrants. Imran Khan is also accused of receiving prohibited funding, but he has managed to get interim bail in those cases. And there's also an attempt to murder case that has been filed against him by a member of PMNN. Last month, he got bail in that case as well. Now, the Imran Khan saga is only adding to the state of turmoil that Pakistan is already in. The International Monetary Fund and Shehbaz Sharif government are still
And now let's talk about the UK. Another type of Brexit is taking place, the Brexit of civic rights. What are we talking about? Global civil society monitor Civicus has downgraded the UK's ranking. It says the UK government is becoming, quote-unquote, increasingly authoritarian. It is restricting protests and deporting migrants. The UK has now been classified as obstructed. That is the word they used. It has joined the likes of Poland, Hungary, Brazil, and many others. You know, the countries that London loves to lecture on rights. It has now joined their club. So what led to this turn of events? How did the once mighty bastion of liberty find itself demoted? Let's go through some of the accusations made by Civicus. First, the attack on the right to strike. The UK government wants to bring a new law to curb strikes. That's because mass strikes in the past few months have hit the government. The cycle began last year. The war in Ukraine led to a cost of living crisis. Britain's inflation crossed 11%. The people were feeling the pinch. They wanted a wage hike. The government resisted. So trade unions took to the streets. There were strikes across the board, from rail to ambulance workers, teachers, nurses, immigration officials. They all marched in protest. The government relented. Yesterday, it agreed to increase wages for National Health Service workers. This is what Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said.
I'm delighted that the government has reached agreement with unions representing over 1 million NHS workers on a fair and reasonable pay settlement. This agreement rightly recognises the fantastic work that our NHS workers like nurses, midwives and paramedics do, whilst also being affordable for the taxpayer and allowing us to deliver on our promises to halve inflation and cut NHS waiting lists. It's a good example of this government getting things done and delivering for the British people.
If the agreement is fair and reasonable, as he says, why did healthcare workers have to demonstrate for months? And why is the government pushing back against strikes? The ruling party is trying to push what's being called the strike bill. It will apply to critical sectors like healthcare and education. They will always need a minimum level of workers. Those who don't comply can be fired, and their unions can be fined. Then there's something called the Public Order Bill. It's been called intentionally vague. This bill is aimed to stop serious disruptions. What are serious disruptions? The ones that are more than minor. I'm not making this up. The draft said all of this. This clause was subsequently removed, but the rest still remains problematic. The bill extends police powers. People can be stopped and searched just on the suspicion of being involved in a protest. The bill criminalizes locking yourself to things, like a lock-on protest, so that you cannot be removed from the site. It also criminalizes other forms of civil disobedience. And we in India aren't too surprised. Rishi Sunak should know all too well about the effectiveness of civil disobedience against British authorities. The Civicus report also considers London's anti-migration push. Conservatives want to restrict the human rights of asylum seekers. They want to ban people from seeking refuge in the UK. This includes the controversial plan to pack refugees off to Rwanda. And of course, the recent rhetoric against people arriving in the UK on boats. Let's stop for a second to appreciate the irony here. The UK is against people arriving on boats. Britain does not want uninvited foreigners landing on its shores. For God's sake, British people on boats is the reason we are talking to you in this language. The UK's anti-migration push is against international refugee conventions and basic human rights. In fact, all the points we mentioned go against fundamental human rights, which is why the UK has been downgraded on the Civicus Freedom Index. It's also why the Human Rights Watch slammed the UK earlier this year. Quick question. Do these reports really matter? Most such reports are political tools to pressurize governments. They're prepared by people with, at best, a peripheral understanding of a society. And they must be taken with a sack of salt. But in this case, we discussed it in detail because London loves to do the same. Western governments and Western media use such findings to point fingers at other governments. We'd like to see how they take this one. Now let's talk about TikTok. It's the world's fastest growing social media platform, also perhaps the most banned now. It has suffered two fresh blows. Within 24 hours, both the UK and New Zealand have banned TikTok. In the UK, it's banned from all government-owned devices effective immediately. Now, this is in line with other Western bans. The US, Canada, the European Union also banned the same platform. As for New Zealand, its ban will begin from the 31st of March. But it's only for about 500 people in New Zealand's parliamentary complex. The others can use the platform for now, the app. Reports say government agencies could later announce a full ban. And TikTok's problems are not just limited to government devices. The US has issued an ultimatum. Chinese companies need to sell their share in TikTok. If they don't, the platform faces a total ban in the US. So why has TikTok ruffled so many feathers? Let's start by looking at what the UK said to justify the ban.
We take the security of government devices very seriously, and we are constantly working to ensure that those devices remain as safe and secure as possible. And so, as part of that effort, I recently commissioned a review by our cybersecurity experts to assess the risks posed by certain third-party apps on government devices, and in particular, the installation and use of TikTok.
New Zealand's new Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, explained his country's stance.
Departments, our system works slightly differently to other countries. Departments and agencies follow the advice take advice from the GCSB in terms of their IT and their cybersecurity policies. And we don't have a blanket across the public sector approach to this, which happens in other areas. And so I'd expect that departments and agencies, including the Parliament, would consider the advice of the GCSB in making those decisions.
This is what the White House said yesterday about a potential blanket ban on TikTok.
So, look, we've expressed concerns over China's potential use of software platforms that could endanger or threaten America's safety and their national security. So that is the president's concern. That is why we have called on Congress to take action. We see a bipartisan piece of legislation that that we are supporting. It's called the Restrict Act, as you all know and been covering. And so that's the president's main priority, to make sure when it comes to their safety, when it comes to their security, when it comes to our national security, that those things are protected. And so that has been the president's focus over the last couple of years.
So why are these countries citing national security concerns when banning it? You see, TikTok is owned by the Chinese company ByteDance. ByteDance is headquartered in Beijing, which means it has to follow Chinese law. And that means the Chinese government can access all the data TikTok collects. This is due to a law that was passed in China in 2017. It obligates Chinese firms to hand over personal data if Beijing demands it. Of course, TikTok says it hasn't happened yet. It also claims to be doing its best to protect user data. TikTok says it has spent over $1.5 billion on data security. It has also moved some user data out of China, but that's not helping. Now, Beijing has come to its defense. It is slamming the bans and is especially critical of the US.
数据安全问题不应成为个别国家泛化国家安全概念。
We have always maintained that the issue of data security should not become a tool for certain countries to generalize the concept of national security, abuse national power, and unreasonably suppress enterprises in other countries. The US side has so far failed to produce evidence that TikTok threatens US national security.
But many still aren't convinced. The UK and New Zealand joined the growing list of those banning TikTok. The first, of course, was India. New Delhi banned the platform after China tried to invade Indian territory in 2020. Then, as we mentioned, there are the government device bans imposed by the US, Canada, and EU bodies. Belgium also announced a government ban just last week. Taiwan, too, has banned TikTok. Taipei says China is using the app to wage disinformation campaigns in the island. And then there's a slightly unlikely nation to have banned this app. Taliban ruled Afghanistan, but their reason is quite different. They say the app is leading Afghan youths astray. So for one reason or another, TikTok is facing more scrutiny and more bans, and no amount of PR is helping. And now let's talk about Türkiye. Last month, it was ravaged by deadly earthquakes. More than 48,000 people died. And now it is battling floods. Torrential flooding has turned its streets into rivers. At least 14 people have died, several others are missing. The devastated communities are left to clean up after nature's destruction again. And what about President Recep Tayyip Erdogan? What role will he play in this pre-election test? After all, he's still grappling with the aftermath of the earthquakes. Here's a report. This is what happened to Türkiye last month. It battled the wrath of devastating earthquakes. More than 48,000 people died. 200,000 buildings were severely damaged. And tens of thousands of people were left homeless. Now another disaster has struck the same southeastern provinces. Torrential rains have led to massive floods. At least 14 people have died. Several others are missing. Floodwaters are surging along the streets, sweeping away cars, splitting roads into two, killing quake survivors living in container homes.
During the night it rained. Our tent was flooded. I was barely able to save my children. We are still living in a tent. Despite all, thanks to God.
The water got inside the tent. We went to our neighbors and we stayed outside. We have small children. The youngest is 12 years old. We went out. Now we are dealing with the tent, throwing the water out. They gave us wooden pallets. We're trying to arrange them. Everything is in the mud.
We came here because of the earthquake. We have been out since last night. We sank to new depths. The children are all outside. Our home was flooded. We have nowhere to go. The tent was also flooded, all covered in mud. But we have to stay here.
Some areas have received a third of their annual rainfall in the past 2 days. Officials say they have never seen flooding like this. Residents have been asked to evacuate their homes. This came after bodies of 5 people were found in a basement apartment. Bodies were also recovered from an underpass. The current dragged away several people while they were still in their vehicles. Those who tried to help others were swept away themselves. Even hospitals were flooded, and hundreds of patients had to be moved away. Dramatic visuals of search and rescue operations have surfaced. More than a dozen professional divers are involved in the operations. But what about Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan? Where is he? He's currently worried about Finland. As Türkiye nears ratification of Finland's accession to NATO, he met Finland's head of state in Ankara. Erdogan sent his interior minister to the flood-hit region instead. But is that enough? He faces elections in the month of May, and state response to natural disasters has become an electoral issue. Opposition leaders are jumping on the chance they're due to visit the ravaged areas and highlight the government's inadequate response. Meanwhile, Erdogan is facing one of the toughest phases of his 2-decade rule. He's battling a struggling economy. The earthquakes have dealt a blow. Their cost is estimated to be $84 billion, which is 10% of the country's GDP. And while the president was still grappling with this, the biggest natural disaster during his rule, torrential floods have poured water over his chances. He has issued several public apologies. He has also said that no nation could have dealt quickly with a disaster of such a large scale. He may have a point, but it doesn't matter given the rising public anger. And if Erdogan does not move quickly to tackle the flood crisis, a bigger political one might be waiting for him. What does ideal father-daughter time sound like to you? Are ballistic missiles part of the plan? Probably not. But for North Korea's leader and his daughter, it seems to have become a regular affair. They're firing missiles to quote-unquote strike fear into the enemies. We don't know if this counts as quality bonding time, but to each their own, I suppose. Jokes aside, we're talking about an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. North Korea fired one yesterday. It flew about 1,000 kilometers and landed in waters west of Japan. This was hours before the South Korean president met with the Japanese prime minister at a summit. They agreed to work closely on regional security with the United States. So how could North Korea not insert itself into the scene? It has done 4 missile displays in about a week. And this time, Kim was accompanied by his daughter. Last week, she was at the live fire demonstration. Last month, she was at the military parade where the monster missiles were on display. And we don't even want to ask ourselves the existential question, what kind of impression is this leaving on his daughter? Is she too young to be involved in this? This is obviously a special case. But there's one question we should ask. Why does Kim want the world to know his daughter? Her name is Kim Joo-ae. She's 10 years old and believed to be the second oldest child. According to the South Korean spy agency, she's homeschooled and she spends her time horse riding, skiing and swimming. She was first revealed during an ICBM launch in November. At that time, many had asked the same question, will she lead North Korea one day? The early pictures were jaw-dropping. Since then, Kim Joo-ae has accompanied her father at military events, and with each appearance, she seems to have grown in confidence and the respect that she commands. Initially, she was seen clutching her father's hand. Now she takes the center stage, surrounded by military officials. The language used to describe her has also changed. When she was first introduced in the state media, she was referred to as the beloved daughter. But now she's being called the respected daughter. And this distinction is important because in North Korea, and the North Korean media, this adjective is used only for the most revered. Kim Jong-un was called respected after his status as future leader was crystal clear. And remember, the Kim family has ruled North Korea since its foundation, 3 generations of it. They're considered the sacred bloodline to lead this country. So it's not shocking that Kim wants to pass the mantle down. And by the looks of it, Kim Joo-ae is the intended heir. But even if she is, what's the rush? She's only 10 years old after all. Her father was revealed as the successor when he was 8 years old. But that was only in private and only to military leaders, not to the world. So what could be the reasons for this shift? Some say it's because of Kim's poor health. He's only 39 and there's no confirmation of any illness. Others say he wants to give his daughter an easier ride. Remember, Kim's own journey was difficult. He was publicly revealed as a leader just a year before his father died. And this gave him a rocky start. He did not get enough time to establish himself. Maybe he wants better for his daughter. And of late, he's been trying to crystallize 2 things, his weapons and his family. Together, they seem to be a deadly combination on showcase for the world to see. Observers say he's using Kim Joo-ae as a symbol, a reminder that he will not give up his nuclear arsenal. And now some news from space. An asteroid zoomed past the Earth this morning. What's an asteroid? These are rock-like structures that go around the sun. They're also called minor planets. Asteroids, in most cases, are harmless. Those are the cases when they're not heading straight to the Earth. But this one was dangerously close. It went past the Earth 9 times faster than a rifle bullet, 9 times faster, and it was just 240,000 kilometers away from Earth. I know it sounds like a lot, but in astronomical terms, this distance is too close for comfort. Space agencies are keeping a close eye. Is the world at threat? Our next report tells you.
A new asteroid has grabbed the attention of space watchers. It's called the 2023 EY. This rock-like structure cruised past the Earth earlier today. It was a close shave. How close, you ask? Some 240,000 kilometers. That's 10 times a round trip from New Delhi to Washington. It may seem like a lot of distance, but for astronomers, it was dangerously close. The asteroid was closer to the Earth than the Moon. The Moon is roughly 385,000 kilometers away from Earth. So technically, the 2023 EY asteroid flew between the Moon and the Earth. The proximity was concerning, and so was the speed. The asteroid whizzed past at a blazing speed, some 18,000 miles per hour. You know how fast that is? It's 9 times faster than a rifle bullet. A third worrying factor was its size. This was a large rock. It's been described as house-sized, about 16 meters in diameter, roughly the same size as the Chelyabinsk meteor. What's that? It was part of the asteroid that entered the Earth in 2013. It exploded near Siberia. It broke windows in some Russian cities and injured at least 1,500 people on Earth. Thankfully, the 2023 EY isn't expected to enter the Earth. But astronomers have classified it as an Apollo NEO, or Near-Earth Object. It's named after the 1862 Apollo asteroid. And these NEOs, or Near-Earth Objects, are those that have their paths crossing the Earth. You'd be surprised at how many objects are near the Earth. As of February 2023, there are more than 17,000 such asteroids. They may not be visible to the naked eye, but they're captured in telescopes. Such long-range telescopes have been deployed in various parts of the world. Their job is to keep an eye on objects flying close to the Earth and raise an alarm if they get too close. Take the example of the 2023 DW asteroid. It was spotted a few weeks back. And the risks from it, albeit small, have been predicted for as far as 2046. How do you minimize this risk? How do you ensure that it doesn't hit the Earth and cause damage? The key is detection in advance, years in advance. And deploying spacecraft that can deflect asteroids. It's called DART, or the Double Asteroid Redirection Test.
DART spacecraft is going to impact an asteroid and try to change its orbit. This is the first test of planetary defense. Yeah, so the spacecraft launched last November and it's been traveling out. It's about 6.7 million miles away. And up until now, it's been controlled a lot by the mission control. They can adjust it. When it gets close to the asteroid, it'll switch to an automated navigation where it'll guide itself into the asteroid and impact the asteroid.
So while the trajectory of the 2023 EY asteroid makes for a gripping sight, astronomers are working to ensure the Earth doesn't suffer any external damage. You could call them the real-life guardians of the galaxy.
And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Greece. Protests continue over a deadly train crash which happened last month. Clashes broke out between protesters and the police. In the South American nation of Peru, a toddler was rescued from a landslide. The country is dealing with the devastation caused by cyclone Yaku. Meanwhile, in China, a snow blizzard has blanketed the Henan province. And unusual wedding photographs are going viral. They were shot at what's called the end of the world. This term refers to Chile, the southernmost country on Earth. We're leaving you with the visuals. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.
Chiquitito me lo mostraba el pequeño. Está llorando, niño, está vivo, menos mal. Pásale, niño, pásale.
Ey, ahí mira.
Pakistan's frail economy. The Pakistani rupee has fallen to a historic low of 282 to the dollar. There was record high inflation of 31.5% in February. Growth forecast for 2023 and 2024 is a dismal to 3 to 3.55%. Pakistan's fiscal deficit widened by 43% for the third quarter of 2023. And there's mounting external debt of $126 billion, which needs to be paid. So what happens if Pakistan defaults on the debt? For starters, the country will be unable to repay the commercial loans. The central bank will have turned down the debt repayment or service payments to the commercial lenders. This will trigger the downgrading of the country's credit rating by agencies such as Moody's and S&P, reducing international lending confidence for the country. Now, the decrease in dollar inflows will limit the country's ability to import essential items. This, in turn, will impact the economic output, and inflation will skyrocket in the country. Flanked by hundreds of his supporters, Mr. Khan appeared at the Lahore High Court this evening, seeking protective bail in multiple cases filed against him. The court granted protective bail to him in about 9 cases. This comes hours after another court suspended the non-bailable warrant against Imran Khan, and this is in the much talked about Tosha Khana corruption case. Imran Khan has been accused of buying gifts, including an expensive wristwatch he had received when he was the Prime Minister. He bought it at a discounted price, allegedly, from the state depository called Tosha Khana, selling them for profit. Now, all week, Imran Khan has been resisting arrest in the Tosha Khana corruption case. He has been holed up inside Zaman Park residence in Lahore, while hundreds of PTI workers clashed with police outside. They pelted stones and bricks at the police, who in turn fired water cannons on them and bait-and-charged the protesters. Following the street battle, the Lahore High Court prohibited Imran Khan from holding a rally at historic Minar-e-Pakistan on Sunday. The rally was supposed to be part of Imran's ongoing election campaign in Punjab province.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Breaking news coming in when it comes to the crackdown on terror, ladies and gentlemen. The NIA has filed a charge sheet against 2 accused in the Shivamogga Islamic State conspiracy case. The 2 suspects in custody have been accused of arson, sabotage and violence. Now, as per the NIA, these terror operatives were being paid in cryptocurrencies from abroad. The 2 suspects were paid over 2 lakhs via fund transfers from abroad. That's the big piece of breaking news that's coming in as the NIA investigates